See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips. This show is all about your opinion and mine. It's not news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are or need to be on your agenda. So with that in mind, here's what we'll be covering today on the Afternoon Agenda. Boris Johnson is set to make a call to action at COP26 as he joins a new round of negotiations on climate change. But will he manage to dodge difficult questions on the MP sleaze scandal? And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but with fresh fears in Rotherham over child sexual exploitation 7 years after the scandal that rocked the town, we still need to talk about grooming. That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? Email me, gbnews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's time for news headlines with Polly.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon to you. It's 4 o'clock. Here are your GB News headlines. A survivor of child sexual exploitation is calling for the resignations of the Rotherham Council leader and South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner. It comes after GB News revealed up to 1,600 risk assessments have been carried out on children considered vulnerable to grooming in the borough since 2017. Rotherham Council is now holding a meeting to discuss child sexual abuse in the area. A survivor who spoke to GB News is demanding action now.
It's a despicable behaviour when we're speaking about children being abused, and I think that has come from Councillor Chris Reid and Alan Billings. If they're incapable of protecting the people and the children of this town, they need to do the right thing and walk away.
Well, South Yorkshire Police Crime Commissioner Alan Billings, mentioned just there, says he's invited Elizabeth, who you just heard speaking, to meet police teams working on child sexual exploitation to help them better understand grooming. And the leader of Rotherham Council, Chris Reid, says he has the deepest of respect for her and her views. Now, Lord Frost has told Parliament talks with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol are ongoing. The Brexit minister reassured the House of Lords he wouldn't give up on the process until he said it's abundantly clear that nothing more could be done. The Tory frontbencher says the EU needs to remain proportionate in its negotiations.
Gently suggests that our European friends should stay calm and keep things in proportion. They might remind themselves that no government and no country has a greater interest in stability and security in Northern Ireland and in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement than this government.
Sir Geoffrey Cox, who's been accused of misusing his office for a second job, says he doesn't believe he's broken parliamentary rules. Labour's called for a standards investigation after an image appeared to show the Tory MP carrying out private work for the British Virgin Islands inquiry from his Westminster office. The Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, says the actions seem to be in brazen breach of the rules. Well, as you've been hearing on GB News today, Border Force vessels are involved in multiple rescue operations in the English Channel once again. GB News has been told they're dealing with up to 10 separate incidents. That's after another 10 small boats were intercepted just this morning. Yesterday, more than 500 people were found in UK waters. From Monday, people in Wales will need to show a COVID pass to go to cinemas, theatres and concert halls. Protesters have been demonstrating against the extended measures. Currently in Wales, you need proof of full vaccination or a negative COVID test result to get into nightclubs and large events. Russia has sent 2 bomber planes to patrol the Belarusian airspace at its border with Poland. German Chancellor Angela Merkel asked President Vladimir Putin to intervene over the thousands of migrants converging at the border. Putin has blamed the EU for escalating the situation, saying they're trying to strangle Belarus by blocking the border. The Russian president also told the German Chancellor that the EU should discuss the crisis directly with Belarus. Negotiators from nearly 200 countries are scrutinising a first draft of the COP26 agreement thrashed out in Glasgow, hoping to strike a deal before the summit ends on Friday. The Prime Minister has returned to the conference in Glasgow, which is shifting its focus now to transport and low-carbon travel. The draft, published this morning, is urging nations to revisit and strengthen their emissions targets for 2030, so that global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. A 28-year-old woman has been arrested in connection with a fatal dog attack in Caerphilly in South Wales. 10-year-old Jack Leese was mauled to death whilst he was at the home of a friend on Monday. The dog was destroyed by firearms officers. Now, Sir Elton John has been honoured by the Prince of Wales for his career in music and for his campaigning work on AIDS. The musician received an Order of the Companions of Honour, recognising 5 decades spent in the spotlight, plus his action on HIV. Sir David Attenborough and Dame Judi Dench also received the award.
This is just a reminder, I think, that there's more to do, more work to do for music, more work to do for charity. And life is great. I'm so lucky.
Congratulations to Elton John. That's all from me. I'm back in half an hour. Now back to Alex.
How long in prison for a monster who has beaten, raped and trafficked vulnerable girls, treating them with greater disdain than an abandoned dog, with more casual contempt than livestock headed for slaughter, abused, discarded, threatened, assaulted, passed around like a bottle of whiskey in tawdry bedsits between bestial brutes, conspiring and mocking their piece of meat using their mother tongue, regarding the child under their imposed property as more worthless than vermin, inflicting lifelong trauma, physical, psychological and social. How long for such a vile creature? What if I told you the answer for one such disgusting abuser was just 4 years? An 8-year sentence, but out on parole in half the time, to stalk the streets where he had worked as part of a gang to find the perfect victims, the forgotten girls. The ones who had already had so much to face in terms of trauma and tragedy in their young lives that they too struggled to see their own worth. What if I now told you that the perpetrator, a callous and warped sociopathic subhuman, also a father of 5, has subsequently bleated about his rights, his lack of sufficient welfare payments, his being stripped of a driver's licence and threatened with deportation? Are you sympathetic? I'd imagine not. If you're like most people in this country, you'd be horrified that such a degenerate served merely 48 months in prison and is now free to audaciously challenge his punishments. From Oxford to Rotherham, to Rochdale, to Leeds, to Huddersfield, to London, desperately vulnerable, rejected and deprived little girls were hunted to become the prey of depraved individuals on an industrial scale. The extent and spread of the abuse and shocking cowardice of the authorities in acknowledging and tackling the sickening crimes stunned the country. The utter disregard of those who were entrusted to protect the victims appeared as if the value of the little girls coming forward, already flotsam and jetsam, tossed about and falling between the cracks, was deemed lower than the prerogative to not be seen to be causing offence to any one community. Yet here we are again today with grave concerns that thousands of girls are still being trafficked, tortured and treated like sex slaves. How on earth can these crimes still be committed in the cold light of day? Scratch below the surface and the problem runs deep, distressing and sickeningly so. Violent gangs in London forcing children into becoming drugs runners by using premeditated rapes to intimidate their victims into the arms of what claim to be protective rackets, but are networks of hardened criminals. Paedophiles in every corner of the internet. Communities are still turning a blind eye to horrifying and degrading attitudes and practices. And some sentences so short so as to reinforce the feeling that their victims had fewer rights than animals. Today, we really need to talk about grooming. Well, it was described as the biggest child protection scandal in UK history. In 2014, the J report revealed there had been 1,500 victims of child sexual exploitation in the town of Rotherham alone between 1997 and 2013. Fast forward 7 years, and today Rotherham Council is meeting to discuss fresh concerns about child sexual exploitation in the town. Opposition Conservatives allege that there are multiple examples of active grooming and child sexual exploitation. GBNews has revealed up to 1,665 risk assessments were carried out in the borough since 2017, according to Rotherham Council's risk assessment figures. One child sexual abuse survivor in Rotherham has called for the council leader to resign. We've called her Elizabeth, and she has been talking to GBNews and began by giving our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Kevin Larkin her reaction to those shocking figures.
I actually, if I'm honest, I actually never dreamed that those figures would be that high. I thought that they'd have got made some improvement at least, but to have 1,600 plus children identified at risk or involved in a shorter period than what the J report covered is absolutely horrendous.
Because obviously the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Council and the police are saying that they are doing a good job, they aren't sweeping this under the carpet anymore. And don't those numbers say that? Because obviously they are increasing. Don't they show that people trust the police and the council more than they did?
It just depends on how they've been referred to the council or the police, and what have the police and the council done after the referral.
Tell me a bit about the kinds of things you're seeing in terms of child sexual exploitation in Rotherham. What's going on in this town?
We've still got a huge problem, but obviously the model has changed slightly. We're seeing people using local parks, like gang-related graffiti under subways that I've personally reported myself because it were quite disturbing. We're seeing antisocial behaviour on the rise, and that goes for where I live as well, where before what the typical pattern what we'd have seen is gangs of boys causing a bit of trouble. Now it's not, it's girls, and they're using violence, they're using anything they can do to basically cause a scene. Now, why are we seeing that? Is that a cry out for help, or so there's unusual activity going off in places that it were never seen?
And there was an incident you saw at Rotherham Market. I just wondered if you could describe what you saw.
I'd say about 3-4 years ago, my neighbour came to me and said to me that she'd been to Rotherham Markets and she'd witnessed something, which was a lady selling children to men outside it. So the following day, I reported it to the police, and the following day I decided to go and look myself. I reported it again and never got a response.
And interestingly, the leader of Rotherham Council, Chris Reed, responded to that on another outlet, and he said that he didn't recognise that, and he said that he found that very unlikely. I wonder what your reaction is to that.
My reaction to that and my answer to that is Chris Reed can't even get his own numbers right. So how does he know that I'm lying? Or it's unlikely. If they went out and looked, they'd see what the public were seeing. Because another thing that annoys me that lines have been used this week off him is vague intelligence. It might be vague intelligence, but it's not the public's duty to go and look for that. It should be, if they have a belief, whether it's Rotherham Borough Council or it's the police, they should be going to look for it.
And what is your message to the police and the council on that?
If you're going to be incompetent, and this goes for the senior management, both in South Yorkshire Police and Rotherham Borough Council, if you're going to carry on being incompetent, step down.
Who are you calling on to step down? Are you saying people need to go now? Who needs to go?
For a start, what I've seen this week through your media and through other is the despicable behaviour when we're speaking about children being abused. And I think that has come from Councillor Chris Reed and Alan Billings.
And you want them to quit their jobs, step down?
If they're incapable of protecting the people and the children of this town, they need to do the right thing and walk away.
Well, we have made multiple requests for the leader of Rotherham Council, Labour's Chris Reed, to come on to discuss this hugely important matter. But he has said he will decline any GBNews interview requests. In a statement, he said, since 2015, tackling child sexual exploitation and improving services for the most vulnerable children and families more broadly has been our most important task. We are never complacent. We do take the allegations made by Conservative councillors last week seriously and continue to invite them to provide any further information they may have so that the response to their reports can be independently checked and any necessary changes made. I have the deepest of respect for Elizabeth and others who were badly let down by services in the past, and she is, of course, entitled to her political views. South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner Dr. Alan Billings had this to say in response to calls from a child sexual exploitation survivor for him to stand down. When I first became Police and Crime Commissioner, following the J report, I set up a panel of victims, survivors and their families. Elizabeth was a member of the panel. They helped me to understand how grooming happened. I invite Elizabeth to come with me to meet these officers and learn for herself what is being done and to ask any questions she likes to reassure herself that the service offered here is keeping children safe. Well, let's talk now to Sean Bailey, who is chair of the London Assembly's Police and Crime Committee. Grooming isn't just a problem limited to Rotherham, is it, Sean?
No, grooming happens countrywide. I think Rotherham's issue is particular because it seems to be focused entirely around sexual grooming. Here in London, our grooming tends to be along the lines of county lines, which is more based on drug distribution. But of course, these type of crimes very quickly become about sexual exploitation as well, both to recruit and control the young people, but also to make profits as they spread their tendrils out across the country.
And how are they managing to, do you know how they're managing to target and trap girls and boys into essentially becoming slaves to their gangs?
Look, county lines, sexual exploitation isn't new. When I was young, we used to call it going country. The difference now is that the gangs are much more organised and they're much more deliberate about it. And there's certain members of each gang whose sole job it is to go out and look for young, vulnerable people. And it's a combination of friendship and bullying and some very dirty tactics around robbing a young person once they've given them drugs, making them feel like they've rescued them from someone who is sexually exploiting them to then go on and do even more. Those sort of tactics to bring the young person into their confidence. But I would say to any young person, the first step in removing yourself from this situation is to tell a responsible adult around you, because the key thing about grooming children is isolating them from the adults in their life.
Yeah, I mean, there are always very complex circumstances surrounding people who end up normally in these situations. But if you could highlight some of the causes, how are some of these vulnerable young people slipping through the cracks, not being picked up, let's say, by social services or other organisations, youth groups maybe, schools reporting their vulnerability and ending up in the hands of traffickers and criminals?
I think the first thing to be said, Rotherham accepted, that most youth agencies across the country, from schools to police to youth clubs, do a fabulous job in protecting young people. Now, we have some places where that has broken down very badly, and that tends to be a cultural thing. If you look at Rotherham's case, this has been happening over a very long time. And unless they fix that culture, who leads, what policies they have, and what action they back the police to take, because the police can't do anything if they think they're going to be tried in the media. They must be given a room to complete their job properly. So that's one of the first steps in combating the culture. The other pieces as well, which is never spoken about in this arena, which I find deeply upsetting, is parents. We must give parents the support, the skills, the ability to spot when their children are being groomed. I've been dealing with a young man who was basically taken away from his family and swept up by a gang, but his mother recognized the signs and was able to reach out for help very quickly and resolve that situation. It did take some time and it was very painful, but she made the point that she was able to get help. When I asked her about the help, she said, the funny thing is, Sean, I'm not sure other people would have been able to get the help, but she had been a youth worker in her past life and understood some of the mechanisms and the systems. So if we're going to talk about keeping young people safe, firstly, we must have a culture of protection. And secondly, we must employ parents to understand the risks that their young people are under.
Do you think we still have a problem in this country with perhaps young girls especially, or women especially, feeling that if they go and report incidences, that they simply will not be believed, they won't be respected, that actually they don't know who they can turn to?
I think, look, I'm a man. I've been a youth worker for over 25 years, but it would seem to me that trend, that culture is still there. It's much better than it had been in the past. But when you speak to young women, they will tell you they worry about the system being turned on them. I spoke to a young lady recently who's very, she understands the mechanism, and she said you just have to look at rape conviction rates to see how not only are they low, but they're getting lower. And she said that isn't filling young women with confidence to come out and speak on to defend themselves, quite frankly. I mean, here in London, we had the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, say the streets are no longer safe for women and girls and sort of leave us hanging. He didn't come forward with what was going to be done next. So this idea that these things are growing is supported by facts, but we can fight back against this. And the first thing is giving young women the space to be safe, giving young women the right to report and be believed is important. But I go back to one of my core themes. We must back the police to do their job, because if they make a slight mistake, we tear them to pieces, which makes them nervous to confront people that they are worried about when it comes to public safety.
Thank you so much, Sean, for coming on and giving us the situation there in the capital. Sean Bailey, Chair of the London Assembly's Police and Crime Committee. We're going to be continuing this difficult conversation throughout the show. I want to know what you think. Please share your thoughts and personal experiences by emailing me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and please do make sure that you approach this subject with some sense of moderation and decorum. I don't want this to become an opportunity for dog whistling. Let's treat this subject with the respect that it deserves. Now, after the break, the Prime Minister is at COP26 to drive forward negotiations on climate change, but all eyes are on Boris Johnson over the MP sleaze scandal. Our political editor is here with the latest, but first, let's get the weather forecast.
Hello again. Most will have a dry day tomorrow. A fairly grey start, some thick fog in places, but it should clear and generally skies brightening up before things then turn wet and windy tomorrow night and on Friday. Now that is going to come courtesy of this area of low pressure developing at the moment out in the Atlantic. But ahead of that, we've got a couple of weak weather fronts. One continuing to bring damp and drizzly conditions through the evening over South Wales and parts of the Midlands, and another one bringing some showery rain across northern Scotland, where it's also very blustery. Elsewhere, the winds are light, and that will allow some mist and fog patches to form, particularly over parts of northern England and North Wales. A bit of a chilly one across northern Britain. A touch of frost is just about possible in rural areas, but we're a long way from a frost in the south. A mild start to Armistice Day here. It will be a fairly grey start, however. Now, there will be a little bit of showery rain here and there through the day, mostly in parts of the west, but many places will stay dry, and we should see some brightening of the skies, particularly in the east, a bit of sunshine as possible. The breeze will be picking up in the west, and it is still fairly mild, with temperatures in places getting into the mid-teens. It's through the evening we'll start to see significant change as wet and windy weather sweeps initially across Northern Ireland, then into western Scotland, and then these bands of rain will sweep across most areas during the course of Friday. The winds are picking up all the time as well. You can see that low pressure there, the swirl with the wind and the rain. Parts of the east may not see too much in the way of rainfall, but there will eventually be showers across all parts, and southern Scotland, northern England, North Wales look like being particularly wet on Friday, along with the Northern Isles, and it will be blustery wherever you are. That low pressure then bringing a wet and windy spell for Friday, but it tends to ease off and things turn drier as we go through the weekend. Bye for now.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, a draft agreement published at the COP26 Climate Summit urges nations to boost their carbon-cutting targets by the end of 2022. The Prime Minister has today returned to the event in Glasgow, urging countries to pull out all the stops to limit global warming. Mr Johnson had been expected to appear in Glasgow at the end of the week, but brought his plans forward. So does it mean negotiations are stalling, and will he dodge difficult questions on the MP's sleaze row? Well, here to answer those questions is GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey. Do you think this is potentially the Prime Minister going back and making a statement at COP26 to divert attention away? Do you think this gives him a more sort of secure environment than the number 10 press conference?
Some might suggest that. I think it is a little odd that Downing Street decided to put him on a train up to Glasgow today, when he's going to be there for a couple of hours, because he's then going to get the train back, which I think means he's going to be spending 9 hours on a train just essentially to hold this press conference, though he has been meeting with the UN Secretary-General as well. We are expecting to hear from Boris Johnson, we should be saying, in the next couple of minutes. He's due to hold that press conference. He, of course, will be focusing on that interim report into cutting targets around climate change. The initial draft report saying simply is not good enough in terms of cutting carbon emissions to try and keep that 1.5 degree target in sight. And he, I'm sure, will be trying to push through some final changes as we enter into the last couple of days of negotiations. The summit is due to end on Friday. I'd be very surprised if he's not back up there on Friday trying to get a deal across the line. However, while he will want to talk about that, Alex, I'm sure that every journalist in the room will want to be asking him about his judgment last week when it came to the Owen Paterson fiasco, what potentially he might do about Sir Geoffrey Cox, the former Attorney General, who's been on the front page of lots of the papers this morning about his second job as a lawyer and whether he potentially broke parliamentary rules, or even if he didn't, is it necessarily a good look that, you know, he's earning £900,000 a year doing a job from the British Virgin Islands? And additionally, what is going to happen with these second jobs when it comes to MPs? Because it does seem with the Paterson affair, the Downing Street have allowed a kind of Pandora's box to be open, and all these questions now have been asked about whether it is sensible that MPs are allowed to have second jobs, particularly ones that involve consulting. And it's not just Geoffrey Cox, there's a whole series of MPs who've earned tens of thousands of pounds on top of their MP salary to essentially, to a large degree, provide consultation in areas in which some of them used to be former ministers. And so there may be a slight kind of conflict there. Again, if not in terms of actually breaking the rules, certainly in terms of perception.
I mean, this protracted silence from 10 Downing Street doesn't seem to be helping the cause. It seems to me that many lobby journalists have smelt blood. Certainly there are revelations and accusations across Parliament when it comes to double jobbing MPs. But this does seem to be specifically a very Conservative Party problem right now, particularly in the light of, as you mentioned, Geoffrey Cox and his salary of almost £1 million. Well, meanwhile, he hasn't been in his constituency. I mean, they need to address this at some point, surely.
Yeah, there's some extraordinary things about the Geoffrey Cox incident. First of all, that he was away in April and May this year. Now, you have to remember, none of us were allowed to go on holiday until the middle of May. Now, you were allowed to go away for work, but he was going to the British Virgin Islands in the Caribbean to work on behalf of them who are currently being investigated. He was defending them against the British government. So you've got the former Attorney General advising the British Virgin Islands in a case in which they're being taken to court by the British government, as you say, earning a substantial sum of money. Again, that is not against the law, but that means he was devoting an awful lot of time to this. How much time was he devoting to being an MP? And then additionally, and this is where the kind of news story moved on today, is there are suggestions that he may well have carried out some of this work more recently in September in his office. Now, if that is the case, potentially that is a breach of the rules. You're not allowed to use any of the public resources, like your parliamentary office, for private gain. And that is why Labour have called in, again, the Commissioner for Public Standards, who's going to look into this about whether he did break the rules or not. We must say, of course, that he denies that he's broken any rules at all and defends his kind of position in saying that, you know, he is entitled, which he's entitled to do, to go and do this work as a lawyer. He's clearly a very esteemed one who can earn an awful lot of money. But as I say, I think for the public, you know, that I don't necessarily think works terribly well, because most of the public would think if you're an MP, you know, the majority of your time, if not all of your time, should be there serving your constituents, not necessarily outside interests.
Yes, isn't going to be the last we hear of this, is it, Darren? But
no, we're on day 11. It's not going to end tomorrow, I can tell you that. No, it'll be interesting when we hear from Boris Johnson, you know, whether he tries to dampen this down or nip it in the bud. We're going to find out in a couple of minutes' time.
Thank you so much, Darren. Now, after the break, we will be going live to Glasgow, where we're expecting the Prime Minister to hold a press conference on climate change targets. But first, let's get a roundup of the news headlines.
Alex, thank you. Your news headlines this hour. A survivor of child sexual exploitation is calling for the resignations of the Rotherham Council leader and the South Yorkshire Police Crime Commissioner. It comes after GB News revealed up to 1,600 risk assessments have been carried out on children considered vulnerable to grooming in the borough since 2017. Sir Geoffrey Cox says he doesn't believe he's broken parliamentary rules after he was accused of using his MP office to carry out private work for the British Virgin Islands inquiry. Labour's calling for a standards investigation, with the Deputy Leader Angela Rayner saying his actions appear to be a brazen breach of the rules. Lord Frost has told Parliament Europe should stay calm and keep things in proportion in the row over the Northern Ireland Protocol. But the Brexit minister reassured the House of Lords he would not give up on the process until it's abundantly clear that nothing more can be done. Russia has sent 2 bomber planes to patrol the Belarusian airspace at its border with Poland. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, asked President Vladimir Putin to intervene over the thousands of migrants converging at the border. Putin has blamed the EU for escalating the situation, saying they're trying to strangle Belarus by blocking the border. And the Prime Minister has returned to the COP26 conference in Glasgow, where negotiators from nearly 200 countries are scrutinising the first draft of the COP26 agreement. The paper, published this morning, is urging nations to revisit and strengthen their emissions targets for 2030. We hope to be returning to Glasgow soon with that statement from the Prime Minister. And the picture's there. It's Elton John, proud to have been honoured by the Prince of Wales for his career in music and campaigning work on AIDS. The musician received an Order of the Companions of Honour, said to have waited a long, long time for that. I'll be back with a full news update at the top of the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Well, welcome back. As we've been saying, we are going to head to the COP26 climate summits to hear from the Prime Minister when he appears. But in the meantime, GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey is here to keep you company. And today, a draft agreement on emissions was published. Have they managed to make any significant progress that the world can look at and say, wow, that summit's been worth it?
Well, on this basis, you'd frankly say not that much progress, certainly not the breakthrough moment that I think the Prime Minister and others would have wanted. They are suggesting they're trying to keep that aspiration of trying to limit global temperatures by 1.5 degree rise is not within reach. And of course, scientists argue or the vast majority of scientists argue that the worst impacts of climate change will be felt if we go above that 1.5 degree target. But that requires a kind of 45% decrease in carbon emissions by the end of this decade, and that just doesn't seem like it is happening. In fact, this interim draft report suggests that we may get to 2.54 degrees warming by the end of this century. And that is why I think, to a degree, even though there are other political reasons maybe for Boris Johnson also to be at COP, he's gone together to try and bang some heads together to try and make some progress on all of this. But at the moment, countries do seem to be holding out. Now, is that a surprise? Maybe not. We all know negotiations do tend to go down to the wire, don't they? Everyone holds off their final positions until the last possible moment. So it's not right to say that this is kind of like an absolute disaster. It's not that, but it's certainly not at the moment the breakthrough the Prime Minister would have wanted, though I would have thought they would want to see progress over the next 48 hours or so. The summit is due to end on Friday. Alok Sharma, who's the COP president, said that the near final text will be published overnight, and at a press conference said that this agreement would set the future for our children and grandchildren.
I mean, if he can get everyone around the table to sign up to something substantial, then it could be seen as a big win for Boris Johnson. But the difficulty is, of course, the last time in Paris when we had a summit with very distinct and clear targets, those targets haven't been stuck to anyway.
Yeah, that's always the difficulty, isn't it? Difficulty in this, particularly when we're talking about A, something that's very difficult to measure, B, that is quite frankly, quite a long way off of the future certain times. I mean, with India suggesting that they're going to sign up to become carbon neutral by 2070. I mean, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, is certainly not going to be alive at that stage. In fact, there'll be a lot of Indian people who aren't alive at that stage. So you're signing up to something that's 50 years down the line, quite a long way. Easy in some ways to make those commitments, even though that's substantially slower than what the UN would want. And the other question is, what is the sanctions? So if you can't measure it, and these things are so far in the future, but if they're not going to be reached, what's also the sanction? What's the incentive in many ways to try and reach that? And that's why this kind of figure of $100 billion a year, which was meant to be a financial incentive for developing countries to kind of try and cut their carbon emissions quicker than maybe they would like to, or economically as possible for them. That money was meant to be there to help that process, and it's not now going to be there. It was meant to be there last year. It's not going to be here this year. It may be there next year. But again, it's just kind of not making quite as much progress as people like Boris Johnson and others would want. But as I say, this is not the final day. Friday may well spell into the weekend. That will be the moment at which you get a proper feel for whether it's been a success or not.
This conference has been rather overshadowed somewhat by the market absence of some of the biggest offenders, the big polluters like China and indeed Russia, who have been, some might suggest, playing games when it comes to gas prices recently. The difficulty is, of course, that when it comes to those countries that are absent, even if they don't stick to targets or want to sort of sit around the table and discuss this, we end up exporting our carbon footprint to them anyway. Has there been any conversation about how Britain associates with certain countries like China, like Russia, in the light that they're not going to play ball?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right in terms of sometimes we try and lower emissions, or the figures look good because we actually export some of our carbon emissions elsewhere in the world, a bit like what we do sometimes with recycling, where we just give it to other countries to sort out, just because it makes us feel good, but it doesn't obviously fundamentally sort out the problem. I think it's a little unfair to say China's not there. They would, of course, argue they've sent quite a large delegation, and actually the lead kind of climate negotiator who's been around for a long time is in Glasgow. But you're right, Xi Jinping is not there. Obviously, Vladimir Putin didn't go. President Erdogan of Turkey didn't go. President Bolsonaro of Brazil didn't go. And they're some of the big players in all of this. And as always, there's politics at play here about just how willing they are to sign up, about how much they want to see kind of from concessions, particularly from kind of Western Europe and the United States in all of this. I think fundamentally, this is a kind of, the Queen talked about this, didn't she? She said kind of politics is about kind of what government does today, whereas statesmanship is about what global leaders do tomorrow. And there's always a temptation for politicians essentially to try and deal with the now. Because frankly, again, when you're talking about 2030, 2040, 2050, Boris Johnson's not going to be he's not going to be Prime Minister at that stage. And Yet trying to get there actually involves quite a lot of political capital and indeed quite a lot of money when it comes to the UK. So these are sometimes difficult decisions for politicians to sign up. And I think there's a hope, and Boris Johnson, really interestingly, at the start of this conference, was almost trying to shame, I think, world leaders into acting, saying kind of you're being irresponsible if you don't do something about it. I'm not entirely sure that was the world's cleverest strategy, but I think where we'll be at today, and as I say, we are due to hear from him in a couple of minutes, I think he'll very much start to talk up, having previously talked down the prospects of a deal or progress being made here. I mean, he does also need to be seen to get this as a win, essentially, for him and for the UK.
I mean, if it comes to pass that there really isn't much substantive progress, how much will this look like Boris Johnson has failed in his mission? I mean, what's the international coverage of this event looking like?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is an awful lot of international coverage. You only had to look at that tweet by Wolf Blitzer, the CNN anchor who was in Edinburgh covering it, which got an awful lot of derision from some. So, there's been an awful lot of attention, particularly at the start of this conference, and there will be at the end. This was meant to be viewed as kind of the next big COP. COP happens every year, but only kind of every 5 years or so. It's seen as a kind of marker in the sand, and this was the next big one after Paris. We have to remember, of course, the UK wasn't due to host this. It was originally meant to be in Italy, but the Italians weren't terribly keen on it. But then I think Boris Johnson saw a chance, actually, to kind of put global Britain on the map, and it's been held in Glasgow. Again, a deliberate attempt, I think, by the British government, to kind of focusing on the union and that sort of stuff. Politically, I don't think this is good. I think if it doesn't end well, I don't think it's going to cost Boris Johnson that many votes. I think if it had ended well, this would be kind of a string to his bow about kind of the global and historical significance of his premiership. So, it is kind of relatively high risk. But also, and the Prime Minister kind of will play on this, I think, depending on how it does turn out. The UK is just hosting this. They are literally just providing the kind of space for it. Actually, that site in Glasgow, that enormous site where the COP conference is taking place, is actually UN territory. So when you go into, you're in international territory, you're not technically in Scotland. And additionally, it is still a UN-run event. So the UK, we keep kind of slightly over-egging it, and I've slightly done it myself by saying, Boris Johnson's banging their heads together, which he is in theory doing, but it's not as if he's actually running the show. They're just kind of the hosts, if that makes sense, of what is fundamentally a UN event.
Yeah, I mean, we're hearing that Boris Johnson is about to take to the stage any moment soon. But
glad to see he's on time.
Always on time, yeah.
16 minutes late.
But it's been the way of COP26, hasn't it? But it is an interesting sense that there's been a lot of noise surrounding this conference. There's been a lot of activism. We've got, Insulate Britain gluing themselves to roads. But in terms of policy back here in the UK, it does seem to me to feel like business as usual. There doesn't seem to have been much in the way of ambitious and progressive carbon reduction policies in the UK tagged on to this conference.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, though, the UK would say they're doing pretty well. And on most metrics, actually, when it comes to things like renewable energy, using wind and solar and whatever, the UK is doing reasonably well, even compared to some Western European countries. But yeah, there are big, big tasks ahead. I mean, not least of all on insulation. I mean, we do know that particularly in Britain, we've got a lot of homes that are very old, that aren't properly insulated, and will take an awful lot of effort to do so. And that's really important, whether, frankly, whatever you think about climate change or whatever you think about the money being spent on it.
You don't want big gas bills, do you?
Yeah, I mean, insulating your home, it makes entire sense. Why would you ever spend an awful lot of money on energy that is primarily escaping the building you're in? So, but that is going to involve a monumental task of actually trying to work with the private sector to try and make this work. But it is something that could have a quite significant impact. So, there are lots of challenges going ahead. There's going to be very difficult moments for certain sectors. Obviously the car industry is having to transform itself essentially this decade, because electric cars will become the thing, not a thing, the thing, in the next kind of couple of years. And that means, again, a whole transformation of our transport network in terms of fuel stations potentially, in theory, kind of disappear and they're replaced by charging points. Most people will probably charge their car at home. So, this is going to be a fundamental change, but it's going to be a costly one. And that's why there are concerns about, all the costs do they equate to the challenge or to the potential crises we may well see? Climate scientists, of course, argue they do, and Boris Johnson said this repeatedly, he may well say it again today, is that if you put this off, if you don't do it now, actually it just costs a hell of a lot more in the future.
I mean, perhaps a significant policy that has been announced this week, or a business announcement, let's say, is the fact that Rolls-Royce now, it's been said, are going to be creating small modular nuclear reactors to create a new source of nuclear energy in this country. Are we expecting that to be brought about and to be facing Parliament anytime soon, or that to be debated, or is this now full steam ahead? Let's get those reactors up and running.
Yeah, I think this is the seed of what potentially might happen. They're talking about 6, I think, of these, as you say, kind of mini-sized nuclear reactors that would probably be on existing sites. A typical size nuclear reactor, I think, serves 6 million homes. These would only serve 1 million. So they're not necessarily going to have like a massive dramatic impact. But there is a big debate and a continuing debate about just how much nuclear energy should play.
Well, we can cross over now to COP26. We did have some problems with the feed earlier, but we can catch up with the Prime Minister now in Glasgow. Apparently we cannot catch up with the Prime Minister in Glasgow. We're still having a few issues with that feed, a few technicalities there preventing us from listening to what Boris Johnson has to say. But, I mean, when it comes to energy policy, we were talking about nuclear just then. There's been a lot of opposition to nuclear in the past. Are we expecting that to happen now? Are people, do you think, beginning to realise that this is, it's a zero carbon technology, the risks are fairly minimal, and that we might be facing a future as a nuclear country?
I think that there are still objections, and it's interesting, isn't it? Obviously, the environment movement, the green movement, are slightly torn on this. They're not necessarily in favour of nuclear energy as a solution. They would much rather focus on kind of renewable. But at the same time, is it better? Is it cleaner? Does it emit no carbon, essentially, compared to old school fossil fuels? It does. But yeah, it is a tricky one. I will tell you, since we can't hear the Prime Minister, I'll try and surmise apparently what he is saying. He's saying that the negotiations are getting tough. There's just a few days left, and apparently a huge amount to do. He goes on to say that there's no excuse, he argues, at least for the kind of countries involved in this, saying that they know what is at stake, arguing that we need to pull out all the stops if we're going to do what we came here to do, which is what we've been talking about, trying to keep that 1.5 degree target alive from Paris. And he's calling on world leaders, saying that you cannot sit on your hands as the world asks you to act. The world knows what a mess our planet is in. We know what needs to be done. We just need the courage to get on and do it. Now is the time. So again, a kind of almost pleading with world leaders to act, to kind of get their act together in these final few days of negotiations.
But in general, do you think that this conference has been a success, and has it been good for the reputation of global Britain, jumping in opportunistically perhaps to take the hosting of the event away from Italy and see those international delegates? I mean, following after the G7 meeting as well in St Ives, that is potentially 2 big gains for post-Brexit Britain.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, clearly it puts places on the map, and lots of people have been talking about Glasgow across the world in recent days. That there were some teething problems, it must be said, in the first couple of days of trying to get people in to the conference centre, and some of the arrangements that have been put in place. Is it a win? Of course, it's always good to get your name and place on the map. And we all talk about the Paris Climate Accord, don't we, of 2015. So, if it's called the Glasgow Climate Accord or whatever, or agreement of 2021, that's quite good to a degree. But in the end, as I say, Britain is merely kind of hosting this event. It's kind of good PR, but I'm not entirely sure it's going to change some of the kind of substance of what people think about Britain around the world. I think that's, whatever your view on Britain around the world is pretty entrenched already. So does it help? Yes, it does to a degree. Does it fundamentally change things? I'm not entirely sure it does. But what it does give the perception, again, of kind of Britain being still a major player on the international stage, that is able to host events like this and able to give Boris Johnson, I'm sure would argue, some political direction when it's needed. So it does fulfil that kind of sense, that nationalistic pride some would yearn for, in terms of arguing that Britain, is still a serious big international player.
And we were talking earlier as well about other issues facing the Prime Minister today as he stands up to address the world, and he rather has a lot of problems he needs to address back at home. How much is this going to now precipitate out to causing problems for other parties? Because, of course, the opposition benches are taking that opportunity to very much label the double jobbing of MPs as Tory sleaze, but certainly people like Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, has got other positions, and this affects all parties, doesn't it? Are we expecting at any point there to be a bold move to make sure that the standards are ripped up and changed, and that perhaps they're far more hardline than they've ever been in the past?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a push for that. In terms of like the party politics, you're right, it does affect all stripes. I mean, there have been suggestions about Keir Starmer when he first became an MP about some consulting work he did on the Ed Davey point. Ed Davey argues that the money he's made from that goes towards the care of his disabled son. So there are obviously suggestions this is not confined simply to the Conservative Party. However, you know, when you look at the actual facts about MPs and their registered interests, it is primarily an awful lot of Conservatives. Now, that's for a whole range of reasons, not least of all because they've been in government for the last 11 years. And so in many ways, they're more attractive to private businesses as a consultant because many of them have previously served in government in recent times. Though in doing that, there is no suggestion that any of them have broken the rules. However, the Prime Minister's just been asked about this in Glasgow, and he says the most important thing is those who break the rules must be investigated and should be punished. So the Prime Minister making it clear there that, you know, if there is a circumstance like the Owen Paterson affair, because, you know, he did break the rules and he was found guilty of it, but far from trying to punish Owen Paterson, seemed the government were trying to set up a new system that may well have let him off the hook. The tone has changed, hasn't it? And I think that's because the government have recognised that this potentially is doing quite a lot of harm, not just amongst the public, but also, I think, within the Conservative Parliamentary Party itself. The Prime Minister also saying for hundreds of years, MPs have gone to Parliament and done work as doctors, lawyers, soldiers. On the whole population understands it's strengthened our democracy, but goes on to say it's crucial MPs follow the rules. You must put your job as an MP first. And I think that's the difficulty many people will struggle with, that, you know, if you're going to earn over 80 grand a year and your job is to be a member of Parliament representing your constituents, whether they be 70, 80, 90,000 people, at what point do you have time to potentially earn significantly more money doing another job? And I think that's what the public cannot understand, is that you would have thought for most people, your full-time job is your full-time job, and that's what you should be committed to.
I mean, when Owen Paterson was about to face, well, the Standards Watchdog had actually delivered the verdict, there were a lot of Conservative MPs in the first instance whipped up to support him and say that the watchdog had to be changed. The watchdog had got this wrong, and within about 24 hours, or less than that actually, we'd seen a pretty dramatic U-turn. Now, in the instance with Geoffrey Cox, now again, it's now a big name. Of course, he was Attorney General during those pretty uncomfortable raucous Brexit years. His second position, if it is a second position, earning himself almost £1 million. This looks like a very big problem, the Conservative Party. Has anyone been sent out to bat in support of him, or are we expecting probably, despite the fact he's put out a bullish statement, a government U-turn on this, which might see him face the chop?
Well, it's going to be interesting. I mean, clearly it'll be up to him whether he has to step down or not as an MP. There's no suggestion from that statement he's going to do that. Of course, he denies any rule breaking. There will now be an investigation by the Standards Commissioner in Parliament. Just in terms of batting for him, I mean, Dominic Raab seemed to do a little bit of that yesterday morning, the Deputy Prime Minister, but we believe there was a phone call a couple of hours later with Mark Spencer, who is the Chief Whip, in which I think it was made clear to Geoffrey Cox that he needed to spend more time in his constituency and more time in his parliamentary work. So I think a sign that the Conservative Party, certainly at leadership level, were feeling increasingly uncomfortable with this story. And then today, Sajid Javid was doing a media round, speaking to lots of media organisations, including on the radio this morning, and there was no great, seemingly fulsome support. And as I say, we just heard from the Prime Minister, didn't we, in the last couple of minutes in Glasgow, saying that essentially, you know, if there are suggestions someone's broken the rules, they need to be investigated. If it's found they've broken the rules, they need to be punished.
Darren, thank you so much for coming and joining me in the studio today. Well, we were, of course, expecting to be able to cross live to Glasgow to take the Prime Minister live this hour, but unfortunately, a few gremlins seem to have prevented that. But we will be bringing you what he had to say later. You're watching The Afternoon Agenda. Hello and welcome. If you've just joined the afternoon agenda, I'm Alex Phillips, and this show is all about what I think, what you think, and indeed what my guests think. So it's not really news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are or really need to be on your agenda. Still to come today. 4 lifeboats and several Border Force vessels have today been involved in multiple rescue operations in the English Channel. We'll get the latest from our Home and Security editor. And the BBC becomes the latest organisation to withdraw support from the Stonewall Diversity Champions programme. Did our national broadcaster compromise its impartiality on a key public policy debate? And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but as Rotherham Council meets today over new child sexual exploitation concerns, we still need to talk about grooming. Well, that's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? Email me, gbnews@gbnews.uk, or of course you can tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines with Poppy.
Good evening. This is time for your GB News at 5 o'clock. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the world is closer than ever to beginning the end of climate change. Speaking at COP26 in Glasgow, he said countries must pull out all the stops to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius target alive. Negotiators from nearly 200 countries are scrutinising a first draft of the COP26 agreement, hoping to strike a deal before the summit ends on Friday. A survivor of child sexual exploitation is calling today for the resignations of the Rotherham Council leader and the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner. It comes after GB News revealed up to 1,600 risk assessments have been carried out on children considered vulnerable to grooming in the borough since 2017. Rotherham Council is now holding a meeting to discuss child sexual abuse in the town. A survivor who spoke to GB News is demanding action now.
It's a despicable behaviour when we're speaking about children being abused, and I think that has come from Councillor Chris Reid and Alan Billings. If they're incapable of protecting the people and the children of this town, they need to do the right thing and walk away.
Well, the Police and Crime Commissioner, Alan Billings, mentioned in that, says he's invited Elizabeth to meet police teams working on child sexual exploitation to help them better understand the systems of grooming. And the leader of Rotherham Council, Chris Reid, says he has the deepest of respect for her and her views. Now, in other news today, Lord Frost has told Parliament talks with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol are ongoing. The Brexit minister reassured the House of Lords today he wouldn't give up on the process until it's abundantly clear nothing more could be done. The Tory frontbencher says the EU needs to remain proportionate in its negotiations.
Gently suggests that our European friends should stay calm and keep things in proportion. They might remind themselves that no government and no country has a greater interest in stability and security in Northern Ireland and in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement than this government.
Sir Geoffrey Cox, who's been accused of misusing his office for a second job, says he doesn't believe he's broken parliamentary rules. Labour has called for a standards investigation after an image appeared online appearing to show the Tory MP carrying out private work for the British Virgin Islands inquiry from his Westminster office. The Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner says the actions seem to be a brazen breach of the rules. Border Force vessels are involved in multiple rescue operations once again today in the English Channel. GB News has been told they're dealing with up to 10 separate incidents. Russia has sent 2 bomber planes to patrol Belarusian airspace at its border with Poland. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel asked President Vladimir Putin to intervene over the thousands of migrants converging at the border between the two countries. Putin has blamed the EU for escalating the situation, saying they're trying to strangle Belarus by blocking the border. The Russian president told the German Chancellor that the EU should discuss the crisis directly with Belarus. From Monday, people in Wales show a COVID pass to go to cinemas, theatres and concert halls. Well, protesters have been demonstrating against the extended measures. Currently in Wales, you need proof of full vaccination or a negative COVID test result to go into nightclubs and large events. A 28-year-old woman has been arrested in connection with a fatal dog attack in Caerphilly in South Wales. 10-year-old Jack Leese was mauled to death whilst he was at the home of a friend on Monday. The dog was destroyed by firearms officers. And lastly, Sir Elton John has been honoured by the Prince of Wales for his career in music and campaigning work on AIDS. The musician received an Order of the Companions of Honour, recognising 5 decades spent in the spotlight, plus his action on HIV. Sir David Attenborough and Dame Judi Dench also received the award.
This is just a reminder, I think, that there's more to do, more work to do for music, more work to do for charity, and life is great. I'm so lucky.
Congratulations to Sir Elton. I'm back in half an hour. Now back to Alex.
There are fewer crimes more revolting to contemplate than the systematic and psychopathic serial abuse of children. And yet, due to the sheer vulnerability of the victim and a plethora of new subterfuge ways to hunt down young users online, the incidence of crimes against minors is rocketing. Almost 19,000 children were sexually groomed in England alone in 2019. This year, online grooming crimes recorded by police jumped by 70% to reach an all-time high. Yet, despite Sajid Javid promising a review into the characteristics of grooming gangs back in 2018, identifying the prevalence of perpetrators in Muslim Asian communities, the Home Office initially refused to release any details of the independent review, saying it is not in the public interest to do so. But later, they did say that the findings showed that gang-led child sex exploitation offenders were mostly white. Well, given the notably heavily monocultural array of convicted offenders in the most high-profile cases of grooming gangs, evidently contradicting this, it is surely a concern that by conflating offences to draw this conclusion actually risks continuing to bury uncomfortable truths. But as someone who grew up in Gloucester, under the shadows of the horrific abuse and murders of the Wests during the 80s and 90s of vulnerable young girls in the county, a cursory search today revealed a constant stream of newspaper reports of solitary predators targeting young girls in the city again. A truly harrowing and distressing state of affairs. In fact, the number of paedophiles in Britain may be 7 times higher than previously estimated, according to the National Crime Agency, who found 144,000 accounts connected to child sexual exploitation on the dark web, linked to UK nationals. Estimates had previously put the figure at 20,000. We clearly have a very disgusting hidden epidemic of serial child abuse in this country. Oh, and it's time we talked about it. Well, the authorities in Rotherham have been defending their handling of child sexual exploitation in the town. GBNews revealed up to 1,665 risk assessments on vulnerable children have been carried out in the borough since 2017. It also follows a report by opposition Conservatives that claimed there were multiple examples of active grooming and child sexual exploitation in Rotherham. That report has been debated at Rotherham Council this afternoon. Well, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Kevin Larkin is live in Rotherham and has been at that council meeting held to discuss the report on child sexual exploitation by Conservative councillors. Kevin, what's been going on today?
Well, Alex, it was a very difficult meeting to sit through. Many councillors shared their own experiences of being abused, and many read out statements from survivors. There was a mix of opinion amongst those statements of survivors as to whether Rotherham Council was doing enough or not. We saw a lot of debate, and one thing that did come out of it in the end was a show of unanimity, where the Conservative original motion was voted down in the end, 31 against that amendment to 21 in favour of that Conservative amendment, so that was lost, and that meant the Labour amendment, which was slightly different, was now passed. So hopefully it does seem there is some slight progress after this meeting.
Been going on at that meeting. Let's have a listen to that and then I'll come back to you, Kevin.
In the past, Rotherham had a very acute problem with men from Pakistani heritage who groomed and abused children. And we're still dealing with that, as everyone in this room knows. As a result, some people still believe that CSE just means Asian grooming gangs. Extremists have used that as an excuse to promote hate, and our whole Asian community have suffered as a result. A friend of my family, Mushin Ahmed, an entirely innocent Muslim man, was murdered as a result. But what we see today is that perpetrators of CSE in Rotherham are commonly white British men. So if we're not careful about what we say, not only do innocent people get hurt, but we also miss the threat to children that is in our midst.
Well, there is the Labour leader of the council, Kevin, clearly stressing the point that he doesn't want this to be turned into a witch hunt or a targeted attack on the Asian Muslim community. What's been the reaction to that inside the chamber?
Well, Alex, we heard a similar line from the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner, Dr Alan Billings, in his interview with GBNews last week, saying that the nature of CSE in Rotherham has changed. It has moved away from just being a street grooming activity conducted by mainly Asian men, but now, according to the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner and the Labour leader of Rotherham Council, Chris Reid, is moving more towards being an online event, and in their evidence overwhelmingly portrayed by white men. Now, nobody has said here in Rotherham that this isn't an issue across races. The intelligence from the opposition Conservatives, they told us that the examples they found did involve Asian men, but no one is saying that's the full picture. And of course, the most important thing that many people in the chamber were saying is that this isn't about race, this is about catching people who are exploiting children, regardless of what background they come from.
Yeah, well, you may also remember the Rochdale child sex abuse scandal. 9 men were convicted of sex trafficking and other offences. So, Kevin, in terms of the mood in Rotherham now, has this made a few waves in local media? Are people in the community utterly fed up now at this ongoing problem that is, it's horrifying to learn about?
Absolutely, Alex, and I think one thing that many councillors shared in this debate was the amount of contact they'd had since this story came out last week. A lot of concerns that is enough being done in Rotherham? Can we do things better? Can we improve things? And a lot of concern. Now, the main difference, I would say, from the discussions that we had is how you go about solving the problem of child sexual exploitation in Rotherham. The Labour Council was putting a great deal of emphasis on making sure people follow the correct procedures, that they go through what they call the MASH, the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, where you can report this intelligence, going through the police and the council as well. And of course, every councillor and everybody in Rotherham would advise anyone with any intelligence on child sexual exploitation and grooming to report that to the council and the police. But the Conservatives say, well, actually, this should be a transparent, open debate, that in a subject as sensitive as child sexual exploitation in Rotherham, that actually the best way of going about this is to have these discussions openly. And in her closing speech, the leader of the opposition Conservatives, Emily Barley, did say that she felt that that was the right way to go. I did also, Alex, speak to a survivor of CSE after the meeting and asked her what she made of it, and she said that she felt there had been a little progress.
Well, that's perhaps slightly comforting there. Thank you so much, and well done for excellent reporting and investigating on that issue. Kevin Larkin there, our Northwest reporter. Now, let's stick with the Rochdale child sex abuse scandal, where 9 men were convicted of sex trafficking and other offences, including rape, trafficking girls for sex and conspiracy to engage in sexual activity with a child. And that was back in May 2012. My first guest this hour is former detective and Rochdale child sex abuse ring whistleblower, Maggie Oliver. Maggie, how prevalent would you imagine that this problem still is in Rochdale?
Hi, Alex. Well, what I would say is that from my work that has continued after I resigned from Greater Manchester Police about the failures of the Rochdale grooming scandal, my work has continued. I'm the founder and the chair of the Maggie Oliver Foundation, and we support any adult survivor of child sexual abuse. And we hear every single day from victims and from survivors who are still being failed, who still come to us because the authorities are not treating their allegations seriously. And we still have a massive problem in this country. It's not just Rotherham, it isn't just Rochdale. We are getting contacted from people, mainly from the north of England, but we are gathering our own evidence. We have our own CRM. So we are building a picture of what is going on, because unfortunately, one of the major problems that is feeding into these constant reports is that there is no joined up system of reporting, of collating the evidence. Every police force uses different data and different ways of collecting the evidence, and it just muddles the picture. And I have to say that leads me to wonder whether that is really what the intention is.
You were a whistleblower back in the day. Why did you have to be a whistleblower? Why was this not being taken seriously back then? And are there parallels with today, with what you just said, that there are still victims coming forward and feeling like the authorities are not acting on this? Are there parallels perhaps with the issues back then which prevented this issue from being tackled seriously and swiftly at the outset, and what's still going on?
I mean, this has been going on, to my certain knowledge, for more than 25 years. And we are making very little progress, because even in the report that you've just shared, that there is a focus on avoiding and explaining what is going on rather than getting hold of the problem. When I resigned from Greater Manchester Police, it was because I saw that they were turning a blind eye to hundreds of cases of child abuse. In the foundation, I know from what I hear every day that is still going on. And it's a whole plethora of different reasons, but we need this to be elevated to a priority amongst police forces and amongst the criminal justice system, which it is not. You know, violence against women and girls, which is part of the grooming gangs, as a whole is not being dealt with properly. All those cases that have been failed over the years, I have yet to see a senior police officer held to account for their failures in addressing this. And, you know, it's not a political point. This is a cross-party problem that needs to be taken a grip of. Victims are still being blamed. We are contacted every day by victims who have approached the police and are being fobbed off. We're trying to work with police forces, but I have to tell you that Greater Manchester Police and West Yorkshire Police are the two forces that we are contacted by about the most. 60% of the victims who contact us say that they are being bobbed off by the police, that they are being let down, and we try to intervene and advocate for them so that we can guide them through the process. But, there is an increase in online grooming, as your report said, but that is the first step in leading to then meeting up with perhaps a child and then grooming them and then abusing them. So it is a process, and the whole lot needs to be looked at and tackled properly. The solution is not an easy solution. Quite honestly, we are never going to do away with child abuse. And we are never going to be able to prosecute every abuser who abuses a child. But what we are failing in completely is in supporting a victim of abuse, in making them feel that it's safe to come forward, giving them trust in the authorities that all that can be done will be done. They are still being fobbed off, and many people know, many victims and survivors no longer feel that they can report abuse to the police because they don't believe they are going to be dealt with compassion, that they are going to be dealt with consideration, and that they are going to be listened to. And we have a failing system that we really need. I would say a Royal Commission into policing to get a grip of this once and for all, because every month we get another report, whether it's the Met, whether it's GMP and special measures, whether it's, the Sarah Everard killing. We are, as a country, we are not taking this and tackling it head on. And we really need to be focusing on the abusers, on accountability, on caring for victims and making them feel that they are safe to talk about what's going on. Rape and sexual abuse and grooming is virtually being decriminalised. Less than 1.6% of reported abuse and rapes makes it to court. That is a shocking statistic.
Yeah, Maggie, I couldn't agree more. It sickens me, it enrages me, it makes me want to hold my head in my hands in despair every time we cover topics like this, but keep up the good work. Maggie Oliver, we need you. We need people like you to keep pushing on this. That's Maggie Oliver, former detective and Rochdale sex abuse ring whistleblower. Now, the Conservative MP for Rother Valley, Alexander Stafford, joins me now. And Alexander, you've launched a petition in response to ongoing child sexual exploitation cases in Rotherham. Tell us about that.
Yes, good afternoon. Well, last week, the Conservatives on Rotherham Council published quite a damning and worrying report about what's going on at the moment with regards to CSC in Rotherham. And one of the findings is not only that it is ongoing, but also the response from the council, and I quote, is practically non-existent at times. And this is incredibly worrying. Rotherham, which had 1,500 girls who were brutally raped over a period of 15 years, and still the council doesn't seem to be listening. So the council, at full council today, the Rotherham Conservatives are bringing a motion to the council of an online petition basically backing that as well, to show Rotherham Council that enough is enough. We cannot ignore these issues. They haven't gone away. They're still going on. And we need to make sure that the perpetrators are brought to justice, and the council and South Yorkshire Police are doing everything they can and more to stop this horrific abuse continuing.
The Labour Council leader and the Police and Crime Commissioner have both seemed to have gone to great pains to make sure this doesn't come down to a focus on a particular community, the Muslim Asian community. Do you think that in part this is the problem, that when we had that Home Office review that was promised by Sajid Javid back in 2018, the findings weren't published, and then a couple of years later, when they did decide to talk about what that review stated, they also went to lengths to say, but that most of the perpetrators are white and British. Are we at risk of conflating similar crimes, child sexual exploitation, but with different modus operandi, some being perpetrated online and others being perpetrated by gangs looking for vulnerable girls on streets, in order to try and dissipate or prevent there being racial tensions? Do you think that still potentially lies at the root with the failure of authorities and the police to really get a handle on this?
I think the Lexus J report into what happened in Rotherham found exactly that there was a concern from the police, the council, the local authority bodies, that there was some bizarre belief that if we don't talk about it, the issue will go away and that we couldn't defend any sensibilities. I think what was shown in Rotherham is that if you ignore these issues and don't take them head on, it gets worse. In Rotherham, under previous case of a big CSE scandal, it was majority the Pakistani community who were doing this. And we have to call out what is going on. Because if you don't call out what's going on, you can never get to the root cause of it. And I think it's very dangerous if we ignore the truth in front of us, because fundamentally we want to stop girls and some boys being brutally raped. That is what we want to do. And I don't care whose toes we step on or who we offend, as long as we stop children being raped. And that is the fundamental, most important thing that's going on.
Yeah, it's sickening, isn't it, that despite having this enormous national crisis exposed to us almost 10 years ago now, we find ourselves back in the same place again today. Alexander Stafford, thank you so much for coming on and all of your work that you do in this area. Alexander Stafford, who is the MP for Rother Valley. Well, last hour, we did hope to go to the Prime Minister Boris Johnson live in Glasgow at the COP26 climate conference, where he arrived earlier than expected today to apparently put a rocket under proceedings and encourage agreement on a climate target. We can now listen to what he had to say.
Thank you very much for coming. Before I went back to last week to London, I warned everybody about the danger of false optimism and not to allow ourselves to think that progress that we need is going to be easy. And having spoken today to the Secretary General and met negotiating teams and the heads of delegations here at COP, it's clear that after a surge of really positive, game-changing announcements last week on methane, on finance, on forests in particular, we're now firmly in the hard yards, the nuts and bolts of international climate diplomacy. And the negotiations are getting tough. And with just a few days left, there is still a huge amount to do. We've made a difference, we hope, for our planet and for our people. We've moved the ball a long way down the pitch, but we're now stuck in a bit of a rolling maul, to mix my football and my rugby metaphors. The line is in sight, but if we're going to get there, we need a determined push to get us over the line. We need to be more ambitious, and we need more credible plans for implementation. We have to bridge the gap between where we are and where we need to be if we're going to cut emissions in half by 2030. And we need to pull out all the stops if we're going to do what we came here to do, and that's keep 1.5 alive and make Paris the success that the world needs it to be. Because that 2015 agreement in Paris was a significant moment in the fight against climate change, but it was ultimately a pledge of action still to come. And it's very frustrating to see countries that have spent 6 years conspicuously patting themselves on the back for signing that promissory note in Paris, quietly edging towards default now that vulnerable nations and future generations are demanding payment here now in Glasgow. And there's really no excuse, because we know what is at stake here. We've been hearing it all week. We heard it from the president of Palau, Siranga Whips, who told me he spent 5 days traveling 7,500 miles across 9 time zones to make sure that the voice of his people was heard. And the least we can do is pay attention when he says that if the big economies don't do more, we, and I quote, might as well bomb his islands. We heard it from Simon Coffey from the government of Tuvalu, who spoke to us not from a podium in a cozy conference room, but knee-deep in a steadily rising Pacific Ocean. And we heard it from the Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, who so moved us on the opening ceremony when she warned that we are digging our own graves, and asked, when are the leaders finally going to lead? And so I say to my fellow leaders, if you stood and applauded her then, you cannot now sit on your hands as the world asks you to act, because the world knows what a mess our planet is in. The world has heard leaders from every country, continent, stand here and acknowledge the need for action. And the world will find it absolutely incomprehensible if we fail to deliver that. And the backlash from people will be immense, and it will be long-lasting. And frankly, we will deserve their criticism and their opprobrium. because we know what needs to be done and we all agree what needs to be done. We just need the courage actually to get on and do it. So now is the time for everyone to come together and show the determination needed to power on through the blockages, to look at the science with dispassionate eyes and think about how we can compromise, how we can be flexible to meet the needs of the planet. And for world leaders who are now back in their capitals, to pick up the phone to their teams here and give them the negotiating margin, give them the space they need in which to maneuver and get this done. Here in Glasgow, the world is closer than it has ever been to signalling the beginning of the end of anthropogenic climate change. And it's the greatest gift we can possibly bestow on our children and our grandchildren and generations unborn. And it's now within reach. At COP26, in these final days, we just need to reach out together and grasp it. And so my question to my fellow world leaders this afternoon, as we enter the last hours of COP, is will you help us do that? Will you help us grasp that opportunity, or will you stand in the way?
Prime Minister Boris Johnson there addressing COP26, the climate summit in Glasgow. Now, after the break, there have been multiple migrant rescues in the English Channel again today. We'll have the latest live from our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. See you shortly. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. Well, now an update on the developing situation in the English Channel. There's been another significant wave of small boats coming across from France today. 4 lifeboats and several Border Force vessels are involved in multiple rescue operations in the English Channel, and at least 10 boats have been intercepted so far. Well, here with the latest is our Home Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, we keep being told, don't we, that this situation is going to be tackled. We've heard the French have been given money. We've heard that, those people who come over here via boats are going to be essentially rendered criminals and sent home. Nothing seems to be stemming the flow.
No, and the problem is they are still gathering in significant numbers along the northwest coast of France. So today, you mentioned 10 there in the intro. It's actually far more than that. It's more than double that now, the number of boats that have come across. This is one here. This is the Border Force vessel Hunter that has come in. There are other Border Force vessels, 5 Border Force vessels that have been involved today. 4 lifeboats also involved, and we're told 600 migrants at least. And that follows 500 who came across yesterday. And of course, you remember, it was only last Wednesday, this time last week, where 853 migrants crossed the Channel. So it's very significant. It's a problem that the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, says she is determined to get a grip on. But really, I think she's pretty powerless to do much about it, while the authorities in France are allowing these boats to leave their beaches. Now, whether they are deliberately allowing the boats to leave their beaches or whether it's just down to the geography of trying to guard hundreds of miles of northwest frontier there in France, that is actually proving quite a logistical challenge for them. Having said that, we do know that they are coming off fairly specific beaches that they come to time after time, and they get onto the water. And of course, once they get onto the water, they know that it's not long before they get to the British side of the waters, and then there is a turn-back tactic that the Home Office is talking about using. It's not being implemented yet, and if it does, it will be very limited. So what do? Well, they're picked up on these vessels. Now, you can see this is one that was washed up on the beach, and that's simply because there are so many of these vessels coming across, they can't actually tow them all. So some of them are just cut adrift and then put onto they're left out in the Channel, and then the tide just throws them up on the beach along the Kent coast and indeed along the coast of France.
Thank you so much for the update, Mark. Seems like we're in a hopeless situation with all of this, but thank you for keeping us informed. Now, after the break, the BBC leaves the Stonewall Diversity Champion scheme. But did the relationship compromise the broadcaster's impartiality on a very controversial area of public debate? First, though, it's time for news headlines.
Alex, thank you. The latest GB News headlines this hour. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson has within the last hour said the world is closer than ever to the beginning of the end of climate change. Speaking at COP26, he said countries must keep alive the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. Negotiators from nearly 200 countries are currently scrutinising a first draft of the COP26 agreement, hoping to strike a deal before the summit ends on Friday. As you've been hearing on GB News today, a survivor of child sexual exploitation is calling for the resignations of the Rotherham Council leader and the South Yorkshire Police Crime Commissioner. It comes after GB News revealed up to 1,600 risk assessments have been carried out on children who are considered to be vulnerable to grooming in the borough since 2017. Sir Geoffrey Cox says he doesn't believe he's broken parliamentary rules after he was accused of using his MP's office to carry out private work for the British Virgin Islands inquiry. Labour's calling for a standards investigation, with the deputy leader of Labour, Angela Rayner, saying his actions do appear to be a brazen breach of the rules. Lord Frost has told Parliament Europe should stay calm and keep things in proportion in the row over the Northern Ireland Protocol. But the Brexit minister assured the House of Lords he wouldn't give up on the process until it was abundantly clear nothing more could be done. Russia has sent 2 bomber planes to patrol the Belarusian airspace at its border with Poland. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel asked the President Vladimir Putin to intervene over thousands of migrants converging at the border. Putin has blamed the EU for the escalating situation, saying they're trying to strangle Belarus by blocking the border. And here in the UK, Sir Elton John has been honoured by the Prince of Wales for his career in music and his campaigning work on AIDS. The musician received an Order of the Companions of Honour. Our congratulations to him. That's all from me. I'm back in half an hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, the BBC has pulled out of a controversial workplace diversity scheme run by the charity Stonewall because of concerns over the broadcaster's impartiality. Numerous organisations have now left the Diversity Champions programme and Workplace Equality Index. It comes after Stonewall was accused of misrepresenting the Equality Act and promoting gender, rather than biological sex, as a protected characteristic. A claim Stonewall denies. Well, the BBC sent us this statement on their decision. The BBC is fully committed to being an industry-leading employer on LGBTQ+ inclusion. We are proud of our lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans colleagues, and we support them to have fulfilling careers at the BBC. Along with many other UK employers, the BBC has participated in Stonewall's Diversity Champions programme to support our objective to create a fully inclusive workplace. However, over time, our participation in the programme has led some to question whether the BBC can be impartial when reporting on public policy debates where Stonewall is taking an active role. After careful consideration, we believe it is time to step back from the Diversity Champions programme and will also no longer participate in Stonewall's Workplace Equality Index. Well, joining me now is the founder of Conservatives for Women, Caroline Fisk. Caroline, What were the concerns around the BBC being part of this scheme? Because on the face of it, on the packaging, the box, so to speak, simply says, well, we want to be an inclusive workplace, but it's not that easy, is it?
Okay, so Stonewall was founded to protect gay rights and was a hugely respected organisation. But several years ago, Stonewall decided instead to focus on gender ideology, and it's very open about this. This is not disputed. So gender ideology is the idea that we all have an inner gender identity and that should be prioritised over our biological sex. So that if a little girl at school decides that she wants to identify as a boy, the idea is that we should affirm that teachers should affirm that, and parents should affirm that. Now, imagine if this little girl goes on to puberty blockers and then onto cross-sex hormones. She may render herself sterile for life, medicalized for life. So this is very concerning. It may seem like I'm exaggerating here, but I'm not. Stonewall would say that we should affirm even children's maybe passing gender identities. And equally, if a man wants to self-identify as a woman, Stonewall's gender ideology, the idea is that we should affirm that and that we really don't have any basis to question that, so that men can self-identify into women's single-sex spaces and into women's sports, women's hospital wards, prisons. So you can see why people have been very, very concerned about so many organisations remaining within the Stonewall diversity schemes.
Yeah, I mean, we've had incidences, haven't we, of government departments on Whitehall being part of this scheme, of the NHS taking part of this scheme. And, of course, it has created a lot of controversial output, and we've seen in the media a lot lately about those arguments taking place. Indeed, in fact, Andrew Marr on the Sunday morning political programme has questioned both the Prime Minister and Keir Starmer over their position on gender self-identification. But why do you think Stonewall has had so much influence on our organisations? How come this debate is really beginning to cut through and make headlines today when a couple of years ago nobody was talking about it?
Okay, so the two separate questions is, how did they get so much influence? And we need an investigation on this. That's the first thing. Lots of women are now calling for an inquiry as to how this has happened. We all know that sex is binary. We have male and female, yet right across the public sector, we've had, our key organisations buying into the idea that sex is a spectrum or that it's assigned at birth. So firstly, we need an inquiry into, why people just haven't said no. Part of it is that, yes, Stonewall was originally a very well-respected gay rights charity. So it was within these organisations. And then when it flipped to promoting gender ideology, it stayed within the organisation. So that's how it got there. The question is why people didn't start to say no earlier. The second part of your question is why are we really getting into this now? It's the work of grassroots women. Thousands of women across the country have challenged what's going on. Started on Mumsnet, broken out onto Twitter, huge gender critical communities. And it's thanks to them that we're questioning now what's been going on.
And has this pressure fighting back against things like men being able to self-identify as women and use women's single-sex spaces, etc., has this now precipitated other organisations to begin to question their connection with Stonewall? Are you worried that the direction of travel is actually going the other direction and that, say, women opposing these sorts of policies are beginning to lose some ground?
One thing I worry about is there's a lot of noise about it now. I'm actually worried that people will start to lose interest before we've solved the problem. Because we're actually getting so much media coverage now, which is great. But if you actually look to say, what's changed, what have we solved? Key organisations have started to leave Stonewall, but we're not really seeing that coming through in policy changes yet. The Ministry of Justice has left Stonewall, but violent male prisoners are still in women's prisons, for example. So I am mostly worried that Stonewall ideology is so deep within organisations that even if organisations leave this scheme, the ideology remains.
Yeah, I mean, Stonewall sent us this statement. It's a shame that the BBC has decided not to renew their membership of our Diversity Champions programme. But, as with all membership programmes, organisations come and go depending on what's best for their inclusion journey at the time. Are you fairly reassured, Caroline, that you said that this is getting a lot of media prominence and that there has been some pushback? Are you reassured that, you know, if an organisation as big as the BBC can acknowledge that they can't be involved, albeit they say on impartiality issues, that actually the grassroots campaigning by women is being listened to?
It is being listened to, but we absolutely need to keep on going. One thing is the BBC Style Guide, which describes how things should be reported. The very Style Guide says that if a man self-identifies as a woman, he should be referred to as a woman by the BBC. So you can see Stonewall's gone, but the ideology remains. And it's just going to take a huge amount of work to keep pushing through and to push this dangerous ideology out of so many of our enormous institutions, our important institutions.
Caroline, thank you ever so much. As they say, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, so just you try it. Caroline Fisk there from Conservatives for Women. Now, parents are being urged to understand how seasonal hormone changes can impact their teenagers' mental health. Mood swings, changes in sleeping patterns and other symptoms like memory fog, constant fatigue, headaches or digestive troubles can be connected with hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers that are secreted directly into the blood, which carries them to organs and tissues of the body for various very important functions. So do you know your hormones? From vitamin D, cortisol, estrogen and testosterone, joining me now is hormone specialist endocrinologist Dr. Martin Kinsella. Martin, lovely to have you back on the show again. We all know the terrible teens, don't we, as bodies are developing and all the rush of hormones make life pretty complicated. And, you know, we've got the archetypal stereotype of the sort of grumpy and objectionable teen. But how serious an issue is this for young people, particularly as we head into winter?
Well, I think that teenagers have changes in the hormones. When puberty starts, the brain starts to secrete. Basically, when puberty starts, the brain will start to secrete a hormone that then tells the testes in a male or ovaries in a female to start to produce our steroid sex hormones. And they have quite remarkable changes on the body from, obviously, with boys, they tend to obviously start to grow, but then also things like the voicings deepen, they start to grow hair, and that does obviously also affect mood. And the same with females, they'll have estrogen levels will start to rise, that will start to cause development of body changes. So breast enlargements will also start to change body shape. They'll get more sort of hips and fat distribution on the body, but they'll have the same effects in terms of there'll be skin changes. There'll also be mood changes. So they have quite a rough time with this change. And then on top of that, as we're heading into winter, there's quite a few changes to our hormones. So we have things like vitamin D levels. In the UK, we don't get huge amounts of uninterrupted sunlight. So vitamin D is a hormone that's absorbed by it's made by our skin in response to absorbing sunlight. And this time of year, vitamin D levels drop, and that can have quite an impact on the mood as well. And then I think one of the other really key points that we have to remember is that daylight hours have massively changed. And in nature, what the human body is designed to, when it goes dark, is usually designed to rest and go to bed. But we don't. We, as society, we live in artificial light all the time. And this plays havoc with hormones like our cortisol levels and things. So our cortisol levels are staying raised during the evening because sleep cycles this has a knock-on effect on sleep cycles, and that has huge impact on mood and energy levels and so on. So I think you've got a bit of a roller coaster anyway going on, and then this time of year kind of adding fuel to the fire.
But is there anything that we can do? I mean, we can't beckon the sun to come and join us from Africa for a few months, can we?
No.
We can certainly, I'd assume, take vitamin D supplements, but are there other things that perhaps we could and should be doing, or especially adolescents could and should be doing, to give themselves a smoother journey and be healthier and happier this winter?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I always say it's difficult, isn't it, with teenagers? I think that things like spending lots of time in front of laptops and iPads and iPhones late on at night is particularly bad. It really does affect sleep cycles, and that affects cortisol levels. You are very correct in taking what you said before about supplementing with vitamin D. But I think, and that's quite a simple fix, vitamin D supplementation does sort that problem out. But the cortisol, the one that I was talking about in sleep, it is more difficult. I think that teenagers should try to, maybe opt to try and read instead of, read books instead of being on their iPads and these backlit screens. Avoid trying to watch too much TV or computer games very late on at night. Do it earlier. I think, exercise is really important, and good nutrition. So, trying not to eat lots of processed sugary foods late on at night. That's going to further impact sleep cycles, which is going to affect the hormones more. So it's those kind of things: exercise, lifestyle, nutrition.
So much. Well, there you go. The message to parents is get your teenagers to eat well, get them to be more active outside, get them to go to bed earlier and make them ditch their devices. Good luck, parents, the UK over on that one. But Dr. Martin Kinsella there is a hormone specialist and says, well, if you want a more peaceful household this Christmas, it's probably the best way of going about things. Well, you've been watching The Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips. It's been a rather poignant show today, but I hope we have, as a news channel, managed to shine a light on an important issue that is still harrowing many areas of the country. Join me again tomorrow from 4 o'clock until 6 o'clock. Coming up next, of course, it's the fabulous Michelle Jubry with Jubes & Co. I hope you have a very pleasant evening, and don't forget your vitamin C. See you tomorrow.
Good evening. Most of us will have a dry day tomorrow, likely to be fairly dull to begin with, and some thick fog patches around in places as well, but steadily for many it'll get a little brighter through the day. There's a couple of weakish weather fronts close by to the UK, but developing out in the Atlantic there's this area of low pressure that will bring a spell of wet and windy weather. Starts on Thursday night and continues through much of Friday. But back to this evening, and still some patchy rain across parts of the Midlands, South Wales and East Anglia. That's fizzling out. There's another band of wet weather working into northern Scotland. It's still pretty blustery across the far north, but lighter winds in these central areas will allow it to turn quite chilly and could allow some fog patches to form parts of northern England and North Wales